anytime, any day. Why not right now? Stop looking up to your boss and start being your own boss. Don't work for paychecks. Work for dreams with no regrets. This is Cracking the Entrepreneur Code. If you have the passion, we'll create the blueprint. Now, your host. You know him from his 7 tips to build the business you always wanted, and now you're about to hear a lot more. Jack H.M. Wong.
Welcome to another episode of Cracking the Entrepreneur Code podcast show. I'm your host, Jack Wong. Now, today we have a little bit change. We talk about Rich Dad Poor Dad, we talk about sales. I want to digress a little bit on something which is essential. That is life experiences. I mean, entrepreneurship journey to me is not necessarily a smooth ride. So in my show, I do want to bring some guests who can share with you guys their journey, their experiences, their hardship, well, what they have learned from the lesson. So today I have a very good guest which fits my profile. Her name is Pat Iyer. Okay, so let me introduce who is Pat here. So Pat is actually a serial entrepreneur who has been self-employed since 1987, such a long time. So in 1987, she started consulting with attorneys who handle cases with medical issues. And Pat built a large and very successful legal nurse consulting business that built over $1 million a year for the last 5 years. And she sold it 3 years ago. So since then, Pat has turned her experiences into a successful coaching program for the legal nurse consultants. She now also helps people with expertise turn their knowledge into online courses and books, and she served as a freelance ghostwriter and editor. Such a fantastic profile, and Pat, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Jack. It is such a pleasure to be able to talk with you today. I am doing great.
So you have started your journey since 1987. How do you describe your journey as an entrepreneur since 1987?
Well, I would say that it's probably been closer to a roller coaster, Jack, than a flat prairie plain. And that may be true of many of the people who are listening who can empathize with a roller coaster.
Yep, I'm sure that you are not alone. And for listeners here, if you expect that your entrepreneurship journey is a smooth ride or uptrend like the stock market's doing right now, I bet that you have to rethink. So how do you feel with this roller coaster ride in your last 30-odd years?
I think it has been exhilarating, Jack. I know that for the listeners of your show who are working as employees, some of them are probably just chafing at the bit, so eager to get business started. And if you are wired like an entrepreneur, which is only a very small percentage of the population, you want to be in charge of your destiny. You want to be in control. You want to make those decisions that you can implement immediately rather than for an employee who's caught up in an organization where there has to be layers of approval and debate and delays. When you're wired like an entrepreneur, you want fast action and not to have to wait. That's been a wonderful opportunity for me, wired as I am as an entrepreneur, to be able to see an opportunity and know that I have the freedom to investigate it and to take advantage of it.
So what happened is that people tell me, you know what, the traditional education system has taught us the way we think as employees. So when we are employees, obviously the mindset is we got to listen to our boss, follow the instruction, and we cannot deviate from our boss' instruction because we get paid by them. We also know that as an entrepreneur, we can't carry this mindset with us. So can I just ask you, before you were the serial entrepreneur, what was your background? Were you employed before?
I was employed. I went to college to become a nurse, and I worked in hospital settings, which are certainly traditional, hierarchical societies where you have to follow the rules. And there are very good reasons why you have to follow the rules in healthcare, because they protect patients and they make a very complex system work. My role as a owner of a legal nurse consulting business was focusing in large part on medical malpractice cases where the system did not work, where people did not follow the rules, or they made mistakes, or there was a flaw in the system that enabled somebody to get hurt.
Right.
So I'm very aware of the importance of following the rules, but I broke out of that because I began writing a book with a couple of other people from different hospitals. And when the book was published, I was at a point where I wanted to explore other options. And quite honestly, it was terrifying for me to leave a hospital environment where I had worked for 7 years, where I knew everybody, where I felt comfortable. But I had a conflict with my boss and realized that I needed to leave. It was very clear that because of a dynamic that occurred between the two of us, that I needed to be able to take a fresh look and say, I've got a lot of skills and talents. This is not a good fit for me. Let me find another job.
I see. And you know what? While you are sharing with us this particular story, I have a smile on my face and I said, what is the reason why Pat is on my show? It happens just again and again in my show where the guest showing up is basically telling me, reminding myself my entrepreneurship story, because you have been as an employee, as a nurse for 7 years. And I was in a tax consulting firm for 17 years. And the reason why I left the firm is similar, if not the same as your reason. That is, I have a different opinion with my boss. And I have the skill set. I said, why not I do something differently? And when you were sharing with me this part, it's like it resembles with my own experience. I just find it amazing that universe make no mistake as to why we are connected. So interesting.
Well, and it's even harder to leave after 17 years, Jack.
Yes.
Rooted into the job. You've got friendships. It feels comfortable. You know what's expected of you. You know how the system works. To rip yourself away from that and do it voluntarily is that entrepreneurial drive that enabled you to get out of that situation.
In hindsight, I say 17 years doesn't sound a long time, and yet the reason why I asked the differences between an entrepreneur mindset and an employee mindset is that if I just jump out of the plane, which is the phrase I always like to use to talk about me venturing into entrepreneurship because there's no U-turn, I say that what if I don't have the entrepreneur mindset? I wouldn't be doing this show right now. I would have been returning to the corporate world and do my job. So in your case, like, where do you acquire this entrepreneur mindset?
Well, I would like to say it's genetic, but it's not.
Okay.
I was raised by a father whose favorite expression was, "You can't fight City Hall."
Ooh. Tell me.
And
tell
my
us more
mother
about that.
my mother worked in healthcare as a volunteer, and then a licensed practical nurse, and then a registered nurse, and she did not own a business. But I married a man who was an entrepreneur who got into a conflict with his boss when he was the sales director, and got fired while I was just starting graduate school.
Okay.
And it was at that point that we were really in a dilemma, because he wanted to start a business to get back at his boss, to compete with his boss. And I was in graduate school full-time. And we had no source of income for an entire year because he was raising the capital to open up his company. He was not generating income, and I was in school. And by the time I graduated in May, we had less than $200 in the bank. And that's when we got very close to completely running out of money. We had gone through our child's college fund. We had gone through our savings. We were right there stuck. And then I got hired as a nursing administrator for the job that I was in for 7 years that we were just talking about.
Okay.
So that enabled him to continue with his efforts to raise money to open up his factory. He wanted to build or open up a welding shop in an industrial area. And then I was hired by this hospital to come in, so we started getting paychecks again at that point after a year of never once being able to put money in the bank and only taking it out over the course of a year.
I guess that during that time, life would be quite hard. Like, how do you feel at that time? Like you are close to having serious financial trouble. Of course, the next question I would have is, how did you pick yourself up and come back to this game?
Well, interestingly enough, when I was in graduate school, I wrote a paper about battered women. And one of my professors told me that I ought to have that paper published. And I turned that into an article, and that began my writing career.
Okay.
But as I was finishing graduate school, I got invited to give a presentation to the American Diabetes Association in Beverly Hills, California, and I lived in New Jersey.
Okay.
And they said, we want you to come out and give this paper about how you worked with pregnant diabetics. You have to pay your way. You have to pay for your hotel, but you can stand up and give your talk to our group. And we had no money for airfare and hotel. So the professor that had encouraged me to write an article was somebody I went to and talked to her, and I said, how do I get money in order to go? And she said, ask the dean of the school if she will give you money. And I said, but she's this wonderful, large figure in this very prestigious university and position. You want me to go and talk to her and ask her to give me money? And she said, yes, what you did at University of Pennsylvania reflects on the glory of the school, and it was because of the graduate program that you had this opportunity. So I walked into the dean's office. It felt like it was as long as a football field. It must have been a small room, but I was so intimidated. And I explained to her that I was graduating. I had this opportunity to talk about what I did in graduate school, but we had no money. And she said, I think your boss in the hospital should really pay your way. And I told her my boss had said I just started there the week before, so they weren't going to give me the money to do this. So the dean said, all right, here's what you do. I'll give you a list of graduates, and you can look up schools that are in the Beverly Hills area, make some phone calls, and talk about how you did this through your University of Pennsylvania master's program. And then when you come back, I'll give you $400. And I did, and it was enough to cover my hotel and my airfare.
So amazing, because this is a very good taste of the hardcore entrepreneurial experience. You need to learn how to raise capital, make your pitch, keep being raincoat call, ask for money. It's like, do you find all this extremely uncomfortable to what to do?
Well, they are essential skills, Jack. You're right. And they are uncomfortable when you need to do them the first time. And I have not in my life since been in a position where I've had to walk into a similar situation and ask for money, because usually the clients were coming to me. But it made me aware of the fact that if you take a risk, and many of the people listening to this show are risk takers, you don't know how that's going to turn out. Exactly. You may indeed get exactly what you want, which in this case was the opportunity to get on an airplane and check into a hotel and give a presentation to a group of people who had come from all over the country to attend this conference.
It's kind of like when you explain your story, I heard particularly one phrase that you use. Instead of saying, I can't afford airfare, you did say, how can I afford the airfare? So that is a very crucial way of suggesting to ourselves. Entrepreneur's mindset is that it's not about I cannot afford, because that is employee's mindset. Whereas entrepreneur's mindset is that, yes, I can go. Question, how can I afford the airfare going to give the speech? So that is already a glimpse of very successful entrepreneur mindset at that time, based on what I'm hearing. So how did the show go, and what happened after that? Well,
it went very well. It led to more publishing opportunities. They wanted a column on pregnancy and diabetes, and that kept my writing career going. And then in the meantime, my husband was able to raise the money. This was an important factor for us, is that we had to sign a personal guarantee for $1 million so that he could buy this welding business and start putting in the equipment that he needed. We didn't really understand the significance of what a personal guarantee was until it was explained to us by the lawyers that if we defaulted on that loan, it meant that any asset that we had could be taken.
So I guess at that time you didn't have the opportunity to consult attorneys to understand the risk involved in giving a personal guarantee. So how did that go after that?
It was really the only way that they would give my husband the money to sign this guarantee. And of course, when you start a business, you're very optimistic. And there are many things that are clear in your life in hindsight. We realized later on that we were borrowing money in the 1980s when the interest rate was 22%, and he was paying 24% a month interest on that. And there was too much debt. That business was not destined to be successful, just because of the way that it was financed and for other factors. But he gave it a really good try for 3 years and then got to the point where he wasn't getting enough customers. There weren't enough sales. So he had to close the business. And then there was that personal guarantee being held over our heads. So I remember that I was about 5 months pregnant with our second son when the man from the bank came in to look at our house to decide if it was of high enough value to take from us to satisfy the personal guarantee. And I envisioned myself living with my husband, in a cardboard box on the street, completely homeless because we would lose everything. My husband is a very good negotiator, though. And what he said to the lenders was, look, I can't pay you back $1 million, but what I can give you is for every dollar that you loan to us, I can sell the equipment and sell the building, and I can generate 10 cents for every dollar. And they agreed.
Oh, okay.
So it got down to the point that he was able to sell everything that he could and turn over that money to the lenders, and they allowed us to walk away without having to declare bankruptcy.
Wow, that was very close. So in this second experience of very close to bankruptcy, how would you describe the key lesson that you and your husband have learned?
Well, what I learned when I started my business, which was just a couple of years later after this happened, was that I was not going to borrow money from anyone. I didn't want to go to the bank. I didn't want to take out loans. I didn't want to sign another personal guarantee for the rest of my life. If I couldn't afford it, I didn't buy it. So I looked very carefully at how I could start a service-based business, which I did I had 2 filing cabinets and a board to make up a desk in one corner of my family room. That was how I started my business working with attorneys. Ultimately, the business grew, and we bought a office condo. Here's an important point, Jack, that may help some of your listeners. My husband and I bought the office condominium, but then we rented it to our businesses. Okay. So we collected rent from ourselves. We paid for that building 4 times over with the rent that we collected every month from ourselves and paid to ourselves. So the checks came from my company to me as a person for the rent.
So in the end, it becomes large and successful business. Like, what are the critical success factors for you to be able to scale this business?
What was critical was something that I learned in multi-level marketing. And some of your listeners may have been involved in multi-level marketing. I went through a couple of different programs that sold cosmetics and soap, and I realized I was not destined to sell products. I didn't like the sales process. I liked the products. I didn't like the process of selling. But what struck me was the pyramid structure that says you have one person, and then below that person are a line of other people. So what I did in my legal nurse consulting business was that I supplied expert witnesses to attorneys. And there's really 2 ways you can do this. One is to charge a flat fee, and then the expert bills the attorney directly. And then the second model, which is the one that I took, was I would bill for every expert and keep 50 cents of every dollar that I billed. When you've got 10 people generating work for you, or 20 or 50 or 100, at the point that I sold the company, we had 200 people under contract to review cases for us. And they were not all working on cases at the same time, but everyone who worked actively on a case might spend anywhere from 10 to 40 or 50 hours over the lifetime of that case. We got 50 cents of every dollar, and you multiply that by a lot of cases and a lot of people, and that was the big factor in the business model that enabled the company to generate a lot of money.
I see. So what triggers you to sell the business and turning to what you're doing now basically is to coach the nurses?
Well, there's really a 4-letter word for that, and it's called snow. Snow in the Northeast versus sunshine in Florida in the winter. There's huge difference in climate. Right now, as I'm sitting here, it is 80 degrees in Florida, and it is 33 degrees in New Jersey and snowing. And my husband is from India and is very comfortable in a tropical climate.
Right.
The southwest part of Florida where we live is very similar to where he grew up in India. So this gives us an opportunity to escape the winter weather and live in an environment which is beautiful in the wintertime. And then we leave here in May and go back to our house in New Jersey, and we get all the beauty of summertime and early fall in New Jersey. And then when it starts to get cold, we come back to Florida.
I see. So now you are helping the legal nurse consultants by delivering your coaching program. How do you find the transition of becoming a coach right now?
I think it's a real joy to be able to help people. I would like individuals that I can connect with to avoid some of the mistakes, some of the costs associated with being in business. There are things that you learn the hard way, no matter who you are, no matter what business you're in. And those experiences are vivid and painful, and they're part of being in business. Attorneys are a wonderful group of people to work with. They are very intelligent. They are very good negotiators. They love what they do, particularly the people involved in trial lawyer work. They're passionate about their job.
Right.
There are some difficult ones to deal with because they're such good negotiators. They challenge legal nurse consultants on if they think their bills are too large, if the rate is too high, the number of hours is too much. You have to really learn when you're in business, don't have a boss above you that you can turn to for support. You really need to learn how to define your customer service, the limits of what you will do for a customer, and where you need to be flexible in order to keep the customer or to protect your reputation. And I think that's any business that interfaces with customers is going to be challenged by some of those situations where you have to keep the broad view and, not get into a fight over 10 cents, but look at the bigger picture. I discovered in working with attorneys and developing this business that there were times that our system had holes in it, or a series of events occurred that nobody could have anticipated that resulted in something that was unpleasant. And every complaint gave me an opportunity to look at how the business was functioning and where we needed to change to improve. Complaints were not common, but when they occurred, something that you do, like this is true in the medical malpractice field, something that happens in a few seconds can have an impact that will last for months and years and lifetimes. And it's also true in a business. Something that happened quickly, then you spend hours and sometimes weeks coping with the aftermath and figuring out what to do to deal with it.
Right. So I guess from sharing by Pat, I'm not sure whether you get this, but if you can't, because there's just too much good stuff there, too many gems there, I will ask you to really listen again, because there are lots of very useful lessons, and I felt that strongly, like entrepreneurs have to be flexible, have to know how to strike the balance of overcommitting to whether I'm able to deliver. I hear that I need to obtain proper advice, or else the risk can put our business to disappear. I mean, I heard this too. So there are just too many gems that I really thank you, Pat, for sharing your experiences. And I would just like conclude this episode knowing that it's about the time to end. There are always two questions that I will ask. The second last question is a ritual of this show where I always ask the guest to give me most favorite quote that the guest can share with my audiences. So Pat gave me this one: proceed as the way opens. So my question for Pat is, why this quote? And how does it apply to you and your business?
I like that quote because it reminds me that we may go into a situation with our idea of how we want to manage a situation, but we may encounter a new opportunity, an unexpected obstacle. My grandfather was Irish, and we talked a lot in our family about being raised as stubborn, pig-headed Irishmen. And, the stubborn Irishman says, I want this to happen, I want this to occur, I want it to be done my way. And yet, as my children would say, the universe doesn't always give you what you want.
Yes,
so look at the lessons that you're learning when you're trying to really push hard and you're meeting resistance. You have to take a little step back and say, maybe there's another angle that I should pursue. And that way opens for you.
I see. Very insightful. Like, this is not the very last question, but I have one more question for you. Is how do you see yourself in the next 5 years, 10 years? Like, what are you planning to do?
My goal will be to focus on writing and editing and ghostwriting. That enables me to work with a much larger audience than the legal nurse consulting audience.
Right.
I love the creative process, and I love to help people organize their thoughts and share their expertise. I have that ability, and I know that not everybody has it. I have the ability to organize material in my mind and figure out how it should flow, where are the logical steps, where are the transitions. I use that ability for helping people who want to write books or have written books, and they need another perspective of how to make that material, which is so clear in their minds, become more comprehensible to their audience.
Right. And you know what, Pat? I'll call this a gift. I mean, I agree with you that not every single person on the planet has this gift to be able to organize and structure. And for these people like you who are doing what you're doing, I call you guys the structure expert. Okay, so here comes the final question. How can we learn more about you?
My website is patiyer.com, and I have a couple of pages on that website about editing and creating online courses, as well as what I speak about.
So thank you, Pat, for really spending your valuable time to give us your insight about your journey. It's very fantastic. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Jack. I appreciate it.
So that concludes another episode of Cracking the Entrepreneur Code podcast show. And you know what? I'll bring in another guest who is a successful entrepreneur to share with you his or her wisdom, intelligence, and experiences to help you take your business to the next level. Until we next meet, I'm your host, Jack Wong, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
To continue cracking the entrepreneur code, subscribe for more episodes and download the Amazon bestseller, Cracking the Entrepreneur Code, 7 Tips to Build the Business You Always Wanted at crackingentrepreneurcode.com. Learn more about author and host Jack H.M. Wong and book your 30-minute discovery session to overcome any professional challenge at jackhmwong.com/apply.